to go.
Perfect. Should I go ahead and start recording on my end?
Yes, sure, that'd be great.
Well, good afternoon and good morning to our friends on the West Coast. I am Carissa Siren, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's meeting of the National Environmental Youth Advisory Council, also known as the NEYAC. It is incredible to have you join us from across the country for this critical discussion on the NEYAC's advice to EPA. The agency appreciates the time and diligent work of our NEYAC members in preparing for this meeting and for their forthcoming deliberations on their recommendations to the charge questions presented this past February. Those charge topics included environmental justice and youth, climate, clean air and environmental justice, and addressing food waste at home and abroad, a case for circular and sustainable materials management systems. The charge presentations and questions are available in the docket at regulations.gov, as well as on the NEYAC webpage. Now let me say a few words about my role as the Designated Federal Officer, also known as DFO. As the DFO for this meeting, I serve as the liaison between the NEYAC and EPA. I am also responsible for ensuring all provisions of the Federal Advisory Committee Act, also known as FACA, are met regarding the operations of the NEYAC. Given our full agenda today, we aim to adhere to the schedule and ensure adequate time for the NEYAC's thorough deliberations on the draft recommendations, of which we need each member's contribution and perspective to inform the advice that will be sent forward to EPA. Please be mindful to exercise appropriate meeting decorum, and please mute your computer and/or phone when not speaking, and pay particular attention to when your camera is turned on or off. These steps will help avoid any background interference or disruptions. NEYAC members, to comment or ask a question, please raise the hand signal available on Zoom under Reactions. Before you speak, please remember to state your name. Once you are done speaking, please take your virtual hand down. This meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the NEYAC webpage. According to FACA, federal advisory committees will maintain a public comment period, offering the public who have registered the opportunity to provide comments on the topics being considered. EPA did not receive any registrations for the public to provide oral comments for today's NEYAC meeting by the deadline of July 10th, and therefore there will be no oral public comments. Now I will discuss a little bit about the NEYAC meeting minutes. Per FACA, minutes of this meeting will be prepared. The minutes will include a description of the matters discussed and the conclusions reached by the NEYAC members. As DFO, I will prepare the minutes and ensure they are certified by the meeting chairs and vice chairs within 90 calendar days of this meeting. The minutes of this meeting will be available through the NEYAC website, as well as the public docket at regulations.gov. I will now share a copy of today's agenda, which will also be made available to the docket and regulations.gov following this meeting. So here's the agenda for today's meeting. Following an overview of the agenda, we will move into a call order and introductions from each of our members. We will have opening remarks given by EPA's Chief of Staff, Dan Utek, And we will then begin to move into a 40-minute discussion amongst the NEYAC members on the first set of charge questions under the topic Environmental Justice and Youth. We will have NEYAC members present each of the recommendations, followed by a Q&A amongst the members regarding those recommendations. We will have facilitators, NEYAC co-chair Kira O'Brien and NEYAC co-vice chair Asada Rashidi facilitate that Q&A. Following the recommendations for the environmental justice, we will move into the discussion of recommendations for the climate change. This presentation was given under the title of Climate, Clean Air, and Environmental Justice. We will again have NEYAC members present each of the recommendations they have worked on over the past few months, followed by a Q&A amongst the NEYAC members, which will be facilitated by NEYAC co-chairs Gabriel Nagel and Kira O'Brien. We will conclude with a final set of recommendations on food loss and waste, addressing food waste at home and abroad, a case for circular and sustainable materials. We'll have NEYAC members present each of the recommendations discussed over the past few months within the work group, and then we'll follow by a Q&A for each of the members on the council to ask questions, add additional context, or ask for additional information from the work group. This Q&A will be facilitated by NEYAC co-chair Gabriel Nagel and NEYAC co-vice chair Emmanuel Alacantar. We will take a 20-minute break, followed by a return at 2:40 for deliberations and vote amongst the council members on the final set of recommendations that will be set forward to EPA later this fall. This part of the agenda will be facilitated by NEYAC co-chairs Gabriel Nagel and Kira O'Brien. We will follow with closing remarks by EPA's Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, Policy, and Strategic Engagement at EPA, Rosemary Edabakari. We will conclude today's call with next steps and what to expect with regards to the meeting minutes, the recordings, and the next meeting for the NEYAC. I will now have the member roll call. When you hear your name announced, please acknowledge your presence by stating here or present and the interests you represent. We will begin with Emmanuel Alacantar.
Present, and I represent pollution burdened communities on the NEYAC.
Thank you. Alexandra Angerman.
Here, and I represent tribal and disadvantaged communities.
Thank you. Rachel Billiette Brule.
Present, and I represent the interests of Indigenous and tribal people who have experienced firsthand the impacts of climate change.
Thank you. Nicholas Blumenthal.
Present, and I represent food security among youth and individuals across the nation.
Colton Buckley.
Present, and I proudly represent the rural and agricultural communities of the United States.
Christy Drutman.
Present, and I represent the interests of young people fighting for clean energy jobs.
Thank you. Wagik Uwa Wawa Gatharu.
Present, and I represent the interests of environmental justice communities across the country.
Thank you. Osanega Ayador.
Osasanega I represent the interests of science policy communicators focused on the correlation between environmental health and the impacts from climate change.
Thank you. Sophia Kiani.
Present, and I represent the interests of young people and individuals with social followings.
Thank you. Meghana Kunapareddy.
Present, and I represent the interests of educators in climate justice, specifically in high school curriculums.
Gabriel Nagel.
President, and I represent the interests of public school students focused on changing local climate policy.
Kira O'Brien.
Present, and I represent communities working for bipartisan climate and renewable energy solutions.
Thank you. Lisette Perez.
Present, and I represent the interests of inner city environmental justice communities and activists.
Thank you. Asada Rashidi.
Present, and I represent the interests of environmental justice and disadvantaged communities focused on creating equitable climate change solutions.
Thank you. And Paige Saragotis.
Present, and I represent the interests of academics focused on psychology and the connection between mental health and climate change.
Thank you. Thank you. That concludes the member roll call, and this meeting is officially called to order. I am going to ask if we have Dan Utek on the phone. We don't have him yet. Okay. We will pause momentarily while we wait for our opening remarks. I apologize. We are going to take a quick break. We'll do a quick 5-minute break. I apologize as we wait for Dan Utek to be able to join us. Thank you for your patience. Hi, Dan.
Oh,
Let's see, we'll go ahead and reconvene. So if everyone can rejoin, we'll go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, we'll now welcome EPA's Chief of Staff, Dan Utek, for opening remarks. Dan has over 20 years of experience in environmental policy, which all started at EPA as a presidential management intern. Dan has served the senior leadership roles at both the White House and Department of Energy, working on developing and implementing energy and climate change policy. Prior to his federal agency experience, Dan worked in the Senate for 10 years, where he focused on a range of environmental and energy policy issues. Welcome, Dan.
All right, thank you for that introduction, and hello, everybody. It's great to see you all again, and happy to have a brief opportunity to say hello and talk about the work that y'all have been doing. Very excited on behalf of Administrator Regan to join you and to help kick off this second public NEYAC meeting. I know this is especially important as it serves as a forum for you to convene as a full council and officially deliberate the proposed recommendations that your work groups have drafted in response to the charge questions that were presented by EPA back in February. And those charge questions centered around environmental justice, climate change, food loss, and waste and recycling. I want to acknowledge that I know you put in a lot of hard work, many hours, discussing the issues amongst your fellow council members, seeking follow-up from EPA staff and experts, listening to the thoughts of your peers on how to address those charge questions to help us, to help EPA improve the way that we tackle issues like climate change, safe drinking water, environmental justice, and a lot more. This is really good progress, and you've been part of this council for less than a year and are now at a point where you've drafted recommendations for the administrator and for EPA to review and consider. So I want to thank you for putting in that work. We really appreciate your efforts. Your opinions, your voices matter, as each of you brings a unique perspective and your own personal experiences to represent the country as a whole and young people across the country. So the administrator, myself, the entire EPA team, we are standing by ready to listen to your advice, to think about and learn from you new ways about how we could improve on our work, specifically with regard to young people in this country. As the administrator said during the very first meeting in February, the thoughts, perspectives, solutions you and other youth across the nation bring forward to the agency are invaluable. And your input is, I think, super important to help us come up with innovative solutions to build cleaner, healthier, more equitable communities nationwide. I hope we are, as I said, we're eager to have your input. I hope you all also are learning something along the way about EPA and the range of issues that we work on here and how we approach our work. And I just want to say again, thank you to each of you for your work in your communities and also as a member of this historic council. So as you prepare to have your full meeting today, I want to wish you good luck in your deliberations and on the draft advice and recommendations you will finalize and send to EPA for consideration. Thanks again. I'll now hand it back over to Carissa.
Thank you, Dan. We truly appreciate your inspiring words. Thank you for joining us. Having worked closely with the NEYAC members, I know they are ready to deliver their advice and recommendations to the administrator and EPA. So thank you again, Dan.
Okay. Thank you all.
So with that, we will now move into our first summary and discussion of recommendations for the charge topic, environmental justice and youth. I will ask each council member that is presenting a recommendation that you state your name before reading the recommendation. Once the final recommendation is read, the Q&A portion will begin, and again, this will be facilitated by NEYAC co-chair Kira O'Brien and NEYAC co-vice chair Asada Rashidi. So with that, I will turn it over to Lisette.
Hello, just want to double check my mic is working. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Lisette, and I will be talking about our first question within environmental justice and youth, which asks, which barriers to awareness or access exist to empowering and connecting with youth in communities with EJ concerns for agency resources and outreach, such as environmental leadership, careers, internships, etc.? What approaches, processes, or strategies would the NEYAC recommend that would enhance awareness and access? We would like to see the EPA enhance digital media and engagement by utilizing social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok to spread awareness of EPA resources and initiatives, creating engaging content such as videos, infographics, and podcasts to educate and engage youth in environmental justice issues, collaborating with social media influencers and youth advocates to amplify EPA's outreach efforts. We would also like to see engagement in schools and youth organizations by partnering with educational institutions to incorporate environmental justice education into curricula and extracurricular activities, offering guest lectures and educational materials, building trust and relationships by engaging directly with community leaders and youth, attending local events and gathering community feedback, hosting virtual events and workshops focused on environmental justice topics, providing platforms for youth to learn and connect with EPA representatives. Finally, we would like to see the development of user-friendly online resources by creating interactive and accessible tools like interactive maps and toolkits to help youth navigate environmental justice issues and access EPA resources, expanding language options and providing translation services to accommodate users from diverse linguistic backgrounds, enhancing accessibility, engaging communities directly to gather input on the usability of tools like the EJ screen, conducting usability testing, and implementing regular updates based on user feedback. User feedback. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Lisette. Next up, we have Alex Angerman.
Hello, I'm Alex Angerman, and we are going to be covering engaging youth in environmental sustainability, as well as highlighting individual youth climate stories, expanding youth engagement in education and sustainability, as well as developing a national EPA Climate Ideas Conference for youth to share ideas. So to engage youth in environmental sustainability, the EPA needs to implement strategies that not only involve young people, but also empower them to promote innovation and implement sustainable ideas. Identifying their vision for just and sustainable future is crucial for this endeavor. So the EPA can begin by highlighting individual youth climate stories, and this can be achieved through a digital campaign or filmmaking fellowship that features monthly stories of young individuals making significant environmental impacts. By collaborating with youth organizations and media platforms, these stories can be widely shared, ensuring that they reach and inspire a diverse audience. Expanding on awards like the President's Environmental Youth Award for innovative sustainability projects led by youth will provide them with platforms at the EPA events to share their experiences and achievements. Moving forward, expanding on the youth engagement and education is another vital step. The EPA should provide toolkits for starting sustainability clubs, integrating climate education into school curricula, and create online platforms for students to collaborate and share their achievements. Hosting environmental job fairs and working with educational institutions and industry leaders to offer internships, apprenticeships, and mentorship programs will further support this goal. Establishing scholarships focused on environmental sustainability for students in environmental justice communities and organizing conferences where students can present projects and compete for funding will also be essential. Developing a national EPA Climate Ideas Conference will create a space for youth from across the country to present their sustainable solutions and projects. This annual conference will include workshops and seminars led by experts in sustainability to educate and inspire participants. Additionally, it'll provide networking opportunities with like-minded peers and mentors from the environmental sector, fostering a collaborative environment for future sustainability leaders. By highlighting individual youth climate stories, expanding youth engagement in education, and developing a national climate ideas conference, the EPA can effectively engage youth in environmental sustainability and empower them to drive the innovation and sustainable practices forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Next, we'll hear from Paige Saragotis.
Hi, I'm Paige Saragotis, and I will be presenting the third question in the environmental justice section. So the third question is, how should EPA work with corresponding state, local, and/or tribal governments to ensure desired on-the-ground impacts and efforts to advance environmental justice come to fruition? What do youth consider as a reliable and impactful engagement and indicators of success? Firstly, we would like to see the EPA develop continuous outreach programs, not just one-off events. And they should do this by establishing long-term partnerships with community organizations, local schools, and tribal councils to continuously assess and address environmental justice issues, creating a series of workshops and seminars that address ongoing environmental challenges and engage community members in problem solving, and implementing regular update meetings with communities to inform them of progress and gather feedback on EPA initiatives. Secondly, we would like to see the EPA launch assessment outreach programs pre and post-event to assess quantitative and qualitative impact. They should do this by developing and distributing pre-event surveys to understand community concerns and expectations, conducting post-event evaluations to measure changes and impacts, using both surveys and focus groups to gather comprehensive feedback, and utilizing the data collected to refine and improve future initiatives, ensuring that the programs are responsive to the actual needs and concerns of the communities involved. Finally, we would like to see the EPA facilitate youth engagement in environmental decision-making by implementing youth advisory councils within EPA regional offices to enable young people to provide insights and perspectives on local environmental issues, provide meaningful internships and volunteer roles that engage youth in hands-on projects and decision-making, offering real-world experience in environmental management and policy. And finally, offering grants to support environmental restoration and sustainability projects led by youth. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. Next, we'll hear from Osenega Ayador.
So discharge question 4, first of all, Osenega, what best practices, technologies, and/or platforms are best positioned to connect youth to environmental resources EPA has available, including but not limited to green space access / preservation, cleanup efforts, grant opportunities, and policy developing opportunities, particularly for communities with EJ concerns. And our first recommendation for discharge question is edutainment programs. These edutainment programs would be created by created for the purpose of engaging youth in entertaining ways. And the way that we think the EPA can get to this goal is creating short engaging videos showcasing green space access, preservation efforts, and cleanup projects, hosting competitions for youth to propose innovative environmental policies with winners getting recognition and possible implementation, and centralizing website resources for easier access to EPA information and tools. Our second recommendation for this question is to increase the physical presence and the regional office visibility. EPA has 16 TIC-TACs, and using that knowledge, we were coming up with ideas for how we can increase the physical presence. And one way that we are suggesting the EPA could do this is with partnering with local initiatives to facilitate the creation of local environmental youth advisory councils. And these local environmental youth advisory councils, or NEYACs, would feature youth being involved directly in policymaking and local environmental health responses, and increasing activities of regional offices, again, that regional TIC-TAC idea, in local environmental projects to foster community involvement and enhance visibility. And our last recommendation was the effective use of social media, which is something that we've highlighted already in our work group and is one of the major themes in our recommendations. The EPA should effectively use social media for this discharge question to analyze, or by analyzing which social media platforms are the most effective for engaging specific youth demographics, focusing efforts where the most impact can be achieved, conducting live Q&A sessions on platforms most frequented by youth, whether it's YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, with EPA experts on topics like environmental justice and sustainability, leveraging digital platforms and social media to connect with and mobilize youth, providing them with platforms to express their views and influence EPA initiatives. Thank you.
Thank you, Seneca. We'll now move into the final recommendation. Emmanuel Alcantar.
Hi, Emmanuel Alcantar. Excuse me. And I'll be talking about the fifth question: what topics relating to environmental justice are most urgent to youth? The first section deals with green jobs and educational opportunities. The EPA should emphasize green jobs and educational opportunities by emphasizing the importance of supporting workers transitioning from fossil fuel industries to clean energy sectors to prevent economic hardship and promote equity, highlighting the significance of sustainable career paths that align with youth values and aspirations, focusing on local job creation and training opportunities, enhancing awareness of what green jobs entail, such as roles in renewable energy sectors and sustainable agriculture, and promoting entrepreneurship and environmental solutions. The second section deals with clean air and water. The EPA should focus on clean air and water by advocating for stringent carbon standards for gas-fired power plants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and improve air quality, focusing on reducing high ozone levels that adversely affect youth health, emphasizing the need for immediate regulatory actions to safeguard long-term health, and increasing educational efforts to raise awareness among youth about the impacts of air pollution and the importance of stringent air quality standards. The third section deals with mobility. So the EPA should address mobility issues by implementing stricter emission standards for larger vehicles and ensuring accurate assessment of low emission technologies, collaborating with cities to improve public transit systems, making them more reliable and accessible for young people, supporting local and state initiatives to create pedestrian and bike-friendly zones through funding and policy advocacy, and educating youth about the benefits of alternative transportation modes.
Thank you.
And yeah.
We will then go ahead and move into, sorry, just go ahead and finish. What were you going to say?
There's a fourth section on protections for safe sacrifice zones. EPA should ensure, or actually, I believe Rachel's going to bring up this section in Q&A actually. So I think we're good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Emmanuel. So yes, we'll move into our Q&A segment. And again, this is for members who were not part of the work group, who were part of the work group, to ask questions and or provide additional context on the proposed recommendations. So with that, I'll turn it over to our facilitators, Kira O'Brien and Asada Rashidi. Please do, again, use the reaction button and raise your hand when you would like to speak. Thank you.
Rachel?
Hi. So for 2 points, under EJ 5.2 clean air and water, I just wanted to make sure that we included air and water quality standards. There's a lot of focus on air, but I feel like we often leave out issues with water quality as well, especially in areas where we have petrochemical companies and other things going on where it severely impacts our water quality. And then for the second point, just a moment, please. For the second point, I wanted to suggest a fourth point under the fifth question, and that's ensuring protections for sacrifice zones. We, in areas such as indigenous communities and the Gulf South, we face issues where we're particularly vulnerable. We have particularly vulnerable ecosystems, and we often face environmental injustice from these industries that take up our areas. And so I really want to try and make sure that we ensured protections for these vulnerable areas, particularly through avoiding or understanding what a false climate solution is, such as LNG, which come at significant cost to the affected communities and ecosystems, and instead prioritizing solutions that do not put them at risk, but instead make sure that they are protected and are living at a standard quality of life. Also providing appropriate support for recovery in sacrifice zones and at-risk communities through grants for grassroots efforts, ending subsidies to extractive industries harming our ecosystems and communities, and investing in sustainable alternatives. And lastly, recognizing and protecting the intrinsic rights of nature, especially in vulnerable ecosystems such as wetlands, prairies, and old growth forests, which are critical to environmental health but are threatened by corporate interest and human activity.
Thanks for this contribution. Anybody else with questions or responses?
There's no additional questions or comments, we can definitely move into the next summary of recommendations.
I think that sounds good to us.
Okay, perfect. Well, then we will go ahead. We'll move into a reading of the summary recommendations for the Climate, Clean Air, and Environmental Justice charge memo. Our first presenter with the recommendation will be Nick Blumenthal.
Hi, my name is Nick Blumenthal, and I'll be presenting the first charge question, or the first part of the charge question, which is the agency's regulatory process sufficiently transparent for meaningful engagement and encouragement with youth, EJ, and other communities? Firstly, the EPA should enhance transparency through detailed information sharing. And the EPA should ensure the regulatory process is transparent and accessible by publishing detailed explanations of regulatory decisions in user-friendly formats, including the scientific basis, rationales, and expected impacts. Developing and maintaining easy-to-navigate online portals that provide information on regulatory proposals, public comment opportunities, and EPA activities. And providing straightforward guides that explain the EPA's regulatory process and timelines to help demystify procedures for the public, especially youth and EJ communities. Secondly, we should strengthen community engagement by implementing outreach efforts specifically designed for engaging EJ communities and youth, such as workshops, community meetings, and listening sessions. Prioritizing participation from communities most impacted by climate change by providing necessary resources, support, and incentives to enhance their ability to engage effectively, and setting up formal structures like advisory councils or working groups that facilitate continuous collaboration and dialogue between the EPA and community stakeholders. And lastly, EPA should empower youth and diverse community participation by creating youth advisory boards and leadership development programs that invite youth individuals to partake in environmental decision-making. Holding regulatory meetings where advisory board members can provide input, review EPA proposals, and offer recommendations for addressing community concerns. And lastly, partnering with educational institutions to promote environmental education, awareness, and activism among young people.
Thank you, Nick. We'll next hear from Wawa Gaffer for the second recommendation.
Hello, my name is Wawa Gatheru, and I'll be reading charge issue number 2, which is asking, what are the areas of interest to youth communities that EPA should engage on? What are the most pressing issues in your community that the agency should focus on or prioritize? So 2.1 is strengthening climate change education. The EPA should focus on strengthening climate change education by encouraging states to require climate change education at all K through 12 levels, emphasizing not only scientific aspects, but also social and economic impacts, with a particular focus on environmental justice communities. supporting the development of robust training programs for educators to deliver comprehensive climate change instruction effectively, and finally, fostering partnerships with educational institutions to integrate climate change education into existing curricula and create new interdisciplinary learning opportunities. The second part is fostering green job opportunities. The EPA should foster green job opportunities by developing programs that outline clear career pathways in green jobs, tailored to meet the interests and skills of young people, collaborating with educational and industry partners to provide training and skill development opportunities focused on emerging green technology and sustainability practices, and finally, involving youth in the policymaking process related to green jobs to ensure the programs meet their needs and expectations. And finally, enhancing the access to grants and funding for environmental projects. EPA should enhance access to grants and funding by expanding eligibility criteria for environmental grants to include individual student and youth-led groups, particularly those from underrepresented communities, streamlining the grant application process to make it more accessible for young people, including guidance and support through application workshops. And finally, offering a variety of funding levels tailored to different educational stages, elementary, middle, and high school, to support a wide range of environmental projects and innovations.
Thank you, Wawa. Next, we will hear the final recommendation for this charged topic from Asada Rashidi.
Hello, Asada Rashidi, and I will be reading out our recommendations for the third question for the climate charge question. What does success look like for NEYAC? What data or metrics would the group use, if any, to identify successful outcomes of the NEYAC engagement? So the first part is encouraging scholarship programs in environmental careers. EPA should focus on preparing youth for the future roles in environmental sectors by establishing scholarships specifically for students pursuing environmental studies, particularly those from underserved communities, partnering with universities and organizations and mentorships that provide practical experience in the environmental careers, and developing an accessible database of career resources and opportunities in the environmental sector. The second part is performance metrics. EPA should quantify its influence on policy through clear performance metrics by tracking the number of NEYAC recommendations that are incorporated into local, state, or federal environmental bills, monitoring the progression of these bills through legislative bodies and their eventual enactment into law, and evaluating the broader impact of these laws, such as changes in pollution levels, improvements in public health, and increased public awareness of environmental issues. The third part is national conference and resources to start sustainability groups in school. EPA should boost visibility and effectiveness by organizing an annual EPA summit that gathers young environmental leaders from across the country to share ideas, creating starter kits for students and teachers interested in establishing school-based sustainability groups, including guides, project ideas, and funding sources, as well as establishing a national network of school sustainability groups that can share successes, challenges, and best practices facilitated by NEYAC. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick, Wawa, and Asada for reading those recommendations. We'll now move into the question and answer period for the NEYAC members to ask questions on the proposed recommendations. And if there are no current recommendations for this section, we could also always, during our final deliberations, go through how the other sections fit together. Okay, I'll move to Nick. I see a question.
I was just wondering if the group could clarify specifically what it means by developing skill sets for environmental action in terms of long-term career wise? Are these sorts of initiatives meant to prepare students to have environmental jobs within the EPA or other government agencies specifically, or are there also opportunities to develop students' capacities and capabilities for being involved in environmental action across the private sector and academia as well?
So I can jump in there first. Although I was not part of the circular economy work group initial, or this is, yeah, circular economy. Wait, can you refer the specific recommendation number you're focusing on right now? I'm just having trouble finding it in the document.
The second charge question or the second part of it that mentions supporting the development of robust training programs for educators to deliver comprehensive climate change instruction effectively, and the one afterwards that talks about fostering partnerships with institutions to integrate climate change education and create interdisciplinary learning opportunities, which is like 2.1, and then also 2.2, which mentions developing programs that outline clear career pathways and green jobs tailored to meet the interests and skills of young people.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I just wanted to make sure everyone is on the same page there. So yeah, the CC.2.1. So I think that specifically for this one, I would imagine that it's specific both to potential opportunities in EPA, but also the private sector and other areas. I think that we need everyone, whatever field they're going into, to have some sort of training within the climate space. And I think that that's something that we really want to highlight. If that's not coming through in the recommendations directly, I'm wondering if other council members have suggestions on how to potentially reword that to make sure that it highlights how the training should be really comprehensive of all fields. I'll hand it over to Osenega.
I have a question on recommendation 3.1, just about maybe a way we can make it a little bit more expansive, the way we wrote it here, about establishing scholarships specifically for students pursuing environmental studies. Just thinking about the way youth might be not exactly knowing the specific environmental career that they want to do, or even they might not demonstrate a specific passion for environmental studies, but wanting to do things that are heavily connected to or adjacent to it. If there's a way we can expand the way we, the terminology or the inclusivity of it here, so that it relates to those students who might not be exactly saying on pursuing environmental studies, but the work that they're doing, for example, in community organizing, is heavily relevant to the power dynamics and the structures that would prevent certain environmental justice communities from getting environmental resources. Yeah, so if there's just I guess I don't know if it's really a question or more of like me raising a concern about how we could make this language more inclusive.
I think that that is a great suggestion. Do you have any suggestions on how to potentially reframe that? Because I think that is a problem that is just for students pursuing environmental studies.
I think I don't know exactly yet, to be honest, but I will say something along the lines of, for students pursuing environmental studies, or using or pursuing environmental, or trying to incorporate certain frameworks that are heavily related to environmental justice. And I could tease that out more in my mind, but I don't know. That's what I'll rely on right now.
I have a suggestion as well for 3.1. I noticed that it is focused specifically on like university students, but I know certain EPA regional offices do offer like technical trainings or opportunities to folks that like only have a GED and don't necessarily like go to university. And so it would just be helpful to like include something about like technical training opportunities for folks that like, came from like a trade school as well.
Yeah, and maybe that could just be a simple addition to of instead of just like partnering with universities and organizations, we could even just highlight explicitly maybe universities like trade schools and organizations. Or how would you suggest that we incorporate that so it's also broader?
Yeah, I would say including like trade schools and even like labor unions would be helpful to include in that conversation if possible.
Do any other council members have thoughts on that recommendation or the phrasing of it? And this is again CC.3.1. I think that maybe for the first part, we could honestly also just make a quick phrase adjustment of saying establishing scholarships for students engaging maybe in fields of and related to climate and environmental justice. What does everyone think of that phrasing?
I think that makes sense.
I think that could work. If you were also to include something like in the application process, if they find a way to inform you how it applies to their field of study and it really shows an interest in application to it, it probably works out for the best.
And can you specify what you mean by like an application to it? Like that they're specifically working on things in those fields or
So it's like establishing scholarships, and there's usually an application process for these types of programs. Usually what I'll see when I've done like my scholarship applications and things like that, they won't try and limit you too much on what your field of study is. Instead, they will ask, how does your field of study apply to what this scholarship is about or what we are addressing, and how will you use your field of study to advance these issues? And so you're putting it on the student or you're putting it on the person applying to really think it out and make like a plan within the scholarship application of how they will use the funds and how they will use it in their field of study to advance environmental justice issues or climate issues or things like that. Because really this is an interdisciplinary concept, and like this is an interdisciplinary problem, and so multiple fields can have a way of contributing to this. It's just about how the person chooses to use it. And so it's like if you're establishing a scholarship, have it within the application process for them to inform you how they plan on using it within the fields that you're worried about or that you're hoping it to be used in the future.
Yeah, I think that that is a wonderful suggestion as well. Maybe we could say something just to make it more explicit that like establishing scholarships specifically for students advancing environmental justice and climate action, whether within these fields or related fields. So that way it leaves it open for students in other fields who are taking action there to do that. I'm not sure if we could specify the direct like application questions in it, but I think that something along those lines might work. What do you think of that, Rachel?
No, I think that sounds great.
Okay, perfect. So we will make those adjustments on CC.3.1 on the first and second segments of that. And then, yeah, we could look more into the phrasing of CC point 2.1 on those training programs as well, if anyone has suggestions. Are there any other comments on any of these recommendations within the climate change section? Okay, seeing that there are none, since we do have some extra time, we have a few minutes, we could actually make the changes right now to CC.2.1 while we're all here together. I think that that might be an efficient use of time. So, I know, Osenega, you were the one that brought this up. Do you have any suggestions on how to adjust that phrasing to make it more broad?
I was talking about 3.1, I believe, not 2.1.
Oh, sorry,
But
3.1. Yeah, I misspoke
oh,
there.
okay. I just wanted to confirm that we are still talking about 3.1. Yeah, and I really appreciate what Rachel's saying, and I hear you on the aspect of it might be hard to incorporate terminology of like in the application how you imagine doing it, but I think the reason to get to that, or like in kind of in defense of what Rachel's saying, I really see the importance of making it as making sure we're not limiting ourselves, because I do believe, like, for example, if we say pursuing environmental justice careers or climate action or related fields, it's kind of like subjective what is related. And unless we have a specific framework that we all agree upon is a related field, I just don't want a situation where there's someone who is pursuing a field that is traditionally not seen as a related field, and yet they are still applying some amount to some degree environmental action, climate action, environmental justice, green sector frameworks to their field. And I just want to make sure that they are also eligible for such scholarship opportunities. And I think that is one way we can get at that, is by in the application process saying related fields, or having a or demonstrating an understanding of how they will apply certain frameworks related to these fields in their whatever field it is, if that makes sense. So demonstrating an understanding of how they would apply environmental justice or climate action frameworks in whatever field that is, if that makes sense.
Got it. Yep, I think that makes sense. Are there any other comments or responses or questions for climate change before we move on? Okay, with that, I'll hand it back over to Carissa to start the next recommendations.
Great. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, everyone, for that great discussion. We are definitely moving ahead of schedule, so we may probably look to extend the break at 2:20 for a bit longer than 20 minutes. And I just also want to reiterate that you take the time, again, looking at each recommendation. The council does not have to approve every single recommendation that is being put forward by each of the work groups. This is definitely your opportunity to revise, edit if necessary, or decide which ones would be best fit for the agency to address. So again, you can look at each of those individually. Welcome those who aren't part of those specific work groups. If there's new ideas, other thoughts for consideration for the work group members, please definitely take the time to raise that. With that, we can move into the third summary of recommendations for addressing food waste at home and abroad, a case for circular and sustainable materials management systems. We have Paige Saragotis, who will be our first presenter of the first recommendation.
Hello, again, my name is Paige Siragotis, and I will be presenting the first question in the circular economy section. So the question is, how can EPA and its partners, like state or local governments, nonprofit organizations, industry groups, or academia, more actively engage young people to help reduce food waste at home and abroad? Firstly, we would like to see the EPA enhance school and educational outreach by emphasizing the importance of early intervention in shaping food habits and attitudes through educational techniques like gameplay, storytelling, and hands-on participation, creating resources for older youth groups to guide them through initiatives to prevent overconsumerism, showcase useful grocery store shopping habits, teach about food safety and health, and engage in urban sharing. And finally, encouraging youth to engage in urban sharing initiatives like communal gardens and food sharing programs. Secondly, we would like to see the EPA experiment with social media outreach campaigns by making information fun by creating apps or challenges that encourage group participation, such as workshops and competitions focused on reducing plastic usage, creating challenges and workshops around EPA goals to get youth actively involved in EPA work, like a plastic-free week challenge as an example, highlighting youth who complete challenges on social media with photos and stories to encourage participation and showcase success in those challenges. Lastly, we would like to see the EPA change the narrative around food by incorporating culturally significant foods into educational initiatives to form connections with food that holds personal and communal importance, promoting the importance of eating in seasons with local plants and encouraging activities like community gardening again and visiting farmers markets. And finally, developing educational docuseries that recognize and highlight local foods, native foods, and their connections to lands, people, and wildlife.
Thank you, Paige. Next, we'll hear from Lisette.
And I will actually take this one on too, because Lizette just had to go off to a meeting, but I will present the second question as well, since she had to hop off for a second. So the second question is, how can EPA's efforts to manage food as a material in the most sustainable and efficient way be improved to benefit and work for youth? So firstly, we'd like to see the EPA enhance a physical presence in community partnerships by meeting youth where they're at and provide accessible opportunities for engagement and education in schools, parks, and online, just as some examples for locations. Tailoring outreach programs to align with science education curricula and establishing educational initiatives in locations where youth frequent, and supporting farm-to-school initiatives that bring locally produced foods into school cafeterias and incorporate food and agricultural education into the curriculum. Secondly, we'd like to see the EPA provide skill-based training and opportunities by integrating hands-on activities into school curricula, such as field trips or local farms or community gardens as some examples, organizing cooking demonstrations and workshops to demystify food preparation and highlight value-added products, partnering with local businesses and organizations to offer internships, apprenticeships, and mentorship programs in the food industry. And lastly, we would like to see the EPA focus on community building and trusted partnerships. The EPA should do this by establishing connections with community members, grassroots organizations, and others that can have a direct impact on the community, working with schools to establish gardens for hands-on learning environments that foster a sense of responsibility and connection to nature, and finally, supporting sustainable agriculture initiatives in areas affected by environmental degradation and climate change.
Thank you, Paige. Next, we will hear the third recommendation for addressing food loss and waste and recycling from Meghana.
Hi, I'm Meghana, and I will be discussing the third question, which is how can outreach and education on making the most of food and preventing food from going to waste at home be most effective in disadvantaged communities? So for our first recommendation, we determined that the EPA should build connections to food by increasing emotional connection to food through gardening and cooking activities that benefit human well-being and predict pro-environmental behaviors, providing grants and financial incentives for local governments to develop and maintain composting and recycling facilities, and then supporting sustainable agriculture initiatives that promote land restoration and traditional knowledge and modern agricultural techniques. And then for our second recommendation, with charge question 3, the EPA should enhance community engagement by working directly with community-based organizations and schools to establish educational opportunities on children's health and food-related topics, and then combining principles of sustainability, STEAM education, and cultural competency to ensure emotional connection and relevance to diverse backgrounds, and then supporting initiatives for community and home gardens, especially with food plants that can handle the local climate. And then our third recommendation for the charge question is addressing food deserts and their consequences by first addressing legal and regulatory barriers hindering food donation and cultivation to encourage more sustainable practices, educating communities on sustainable food management practices through school gardens, after-school programs, and partnerships with educational institutions, And then finally, supporting local food cooperatives and farmers markets to promote food sovereignty and circular economies.
Thank you, Megana. Next, we will hear the fourth and final recommendation from this work group, and we will hear from Rachel.
So Ella, hello. Rachel Billiot presents the charge question for circular economies. What roles can food retailers and food service providers play in helping young people and those living in disadvantaged communities waste less at home? One of the things we really talked about was, in our first recommendation for this, was plastic pollution and reliable recycling. EPA should address plastic pollution by implementing bans on single-use plastics in the industry and promoting the adoption of sustainable packaging alternatives. Can y'all hear me all right? Investing in recycling and composting infrastructure to improve waste management practices and supporting grassroots initiatives aimed at addressing plastic pollution and promoting sustainable waste management. In our second recommendation, we looked at grant programs and community building. So the EPA should develop grant programs and community building initiatives by partnering with the private sector to target initiatives in reducing food waste and loss in disadvantaged communities. Establishing community kitchens where residents can cook and share meals using surplus food, and prioritizing grant applicants that represent youth-led, community-driven organizations, particularly in disadvantaged communities. And for the third recommendation, we really looked at utilizing AI in a way that would be helpful. So EPA should leverage AI technology by using AI-powered systems to track food waste in restaurants and grocery stores, optimizing inventory levels and dynamic pricing strategies to reduce food waste, providing real-time data for effective food waste management practices.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll now hear from our facilitators, Gabriel and Emmanuel, to take Q&A. Again, this is an opportunity for each of you to revise, suggest edits, or even suggest new recommendations to address the charge questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carissa, Paige, Megana, and Rachel. Yeah, as Carissa mentioned, this is one of the rare times that we're all here together as a council. So let's definitely try to get all the edits we can while we're all together online. And with that, we'll move into now the question and answer period for all NEYAC members to ask questions or provide responses on the proposed recommendations for circular economy. So does anyone have any initial questions? Paige.
I noticed this as I was reading and listening, but the answers for 2.3 and 3.2 seem very similar. So potentially for use of space, we could combine both of them. They're both kind of talking about trusted partnerships and community building and stuff like that.
I would definitely agree with that. Alex.
Mine's more of a comment and less of a question, and it doesn't have to be ran with either. However, maybe less focus overall on consumerism and more focused on the bigger picture, and maybe less on the individual and more on companies and other factors that are more harmful. Even though the grassroots and startups are amazing, maybe the bigger companies might need some more emphasis just so that we make it clear that we know what is the most harmful impact.
Thank you so much for that, Alex. And just a follow-up question, is there any particular recommendation? I know you spoke more broadly, but anywhere that you think we could direct that towards companies or potentially adjust the phrasing of overconsumption so it's less individual focused?
I think it was section 1 and 2 had a couple comments where I was like, oh, well, maybe we could emphasize bigger picture on those. Yeah, I can follow up with that again.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Are there any responses to that feedback or any other questions as well? Oh yeah, Seneca, did you have one?
Yeah, I just wanted to raise my hand first. I know this is actually in relation to 3.3 in circular economy about addressing legal and regulatory barriers hindering food donation. I know under I believe it's called the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act, certain restaurants are protected and organizations that would donate food to shelters and to places where to any like nonprofits that would collect food for people who need food. There are certain protections for these restaurants so they don't face liability concerns if someone gets sick from the food that they donate. But I think there's more to not only, there's still like more work that needs to be done with encouraging these restaurants, for example, to actually donate the food, even though they might understand that they're legally protected. There's a lot of specific, there's a lot of growth in the area of encouraging or even requiring them to donate the food. I know Boston, where I'm at, I guess it's a shameless plug, was considering last year a food recovery program that would actually require certain food vendors to like give any safe to eat food leftovers. So maybe if we can like kind of encourage municipalities or cities to actually create requirements for certain food vendors and also to encourage those who might know that they are protected under that Good Samaritan bill, I believe, or a law, to actually do what they know they can legally do without facing consequences. Yeah.
I think that's a super smart comment, and I hadn't even thought of that earlier. Do you have any suggestion on how we could potentially adjust the framing or the wording of that to reflect that?
I think we say addressing legal and regulatory barriers, but I think going beyond that, it's encouraging municipalities. Maybe it's another bullet point. It says encouraging municipalities and whatever local bodies to require certain food vendors to donate safe to eat leftover food. And whether it's through, and maybe this is another bullet point, I don't want to add too much here. Maybe it's something along the lines of encouraging them using brochures or like active outreach, these food vendors, of ways they can safely or they can improve the quality of the food to allay any other concerns, even though they are legally protected.
Thank you for that. Are there any responses to Asenega's feedback there? Are there any other? Oh, yeah.
I just want to quickly note that please don't hesitate to put as many bullets as you want. Again, we'll take time later this afternoon before we close out. You all will be voting on which recommendations to send forward. And again, it doesn't have to be the full slate. It can be option 1, option 2, option 3. So again, I would recommend, putting, listing out everything that you all are discussing. That way, when we do take a break later this afternoon, that you have the opportunity that each member will be able to review all of the great discussions we're having on these proposed recommendations, as well as the new ones that are being proposed. So please don't hold back on any new ideas that some of you who may have been part of the work group or who weren't part of the work group may have.
Yes, that is a good point, and I've been taking a few notes here and there as well. So actually with that, since we do have some extra time, since we're moving ahead of schedule, we could take some time to make some of these incorporations now, so that way we can kind of expedite the process and potentially send as many recommendations as we can today. Does everyone think that that's the best way forward? And if so, then let's just start going to each of these specific feedback points and trying to adjust the wording now.
Yeah, I just had a comment on circular economy stuff. Maybe I missed this, but do we have language specifically about keeping food waste out of landfills? Just any very specific language around that for educating people or creating incentives for local regions for that? I just wasn't sure if that was there.
So yeah, within I think 3.3, there's some phrasing there. I don't know which specific phrasing you are looking for here, but I think that it mentions, supporting local food cooperatives and farmers markets to promote food sovereignty, educating communities and sustainable food management practices, As for something around landfills, like explicitly stating that, it does not state landfills. I mean, it mentions reducing food waste. Do you think that's something that's valuable to add on explicitly stating like
Yeah,
landfills?
I think either it should be in 3.3 or where we're talking about grants. Sorry, I think that's lower, like where people can apply for grants. Yeah, grant programs and community building. I think it would be helpful to have something specifically. I know it says we're reducing food waste and loss, which I like, but maybe there could also be something like people who are actually like tracking, like collecting data, and like being able to create systems to prevent the food waste from ending up in landfills. I think something like that would be valuable. I just figured like that's like a valuable piece in this section.
Got it. Okay. And then to just like clarify further what you mean for the council. So I guess currently I think what the recommendations are suggesting are sort of preventing additional food from being wasted, but what you're suggesting is food that's like already on the way to potentially be wasted, that's already been sent off, diverting
Yeah,
that actively.
yeah,
Okay. I think that's a really
exactly.
good point.
Exactly.
Okay. What do other council members think of that?
I think that's definitely something we could add, like especially at like another bullet point at the end, since it's kind of like after food has been wasted, like what we should do when it's already kind of happened, but making sure that we're diverting it from those landfills.
Yeah, and honestly, that's something that could fit into. I'm looking into like 4.3 even of like utilizing AI and stuff. There's a bunch around this of like tracking food waste in restaurants and grocery stores, but maybe we could also add something here of like tracking like food waste, I don't know, like routes and stuff or something along that to actively divert them. Um, so yeah, does anyone have any suggested spots where you think that could fit in, or how we would phrase that?
I think the AI section could definitely like it could be a good example for like specifically how we could utilize AI, and then have the other section more be addressing like before it has been wasted, and then have a lot of the AI stuff be more for like once it has been, making sure that how we're using AI to not go to landfills as like one of the examples.
Got it. I mean, honestly, I'm thinking that we could expand on just this third bullet point under CE 4.3 of providing real-time data for effective food waste management practices. Like, maybe in there is just where we just add a line on um providing data for effective food waste management practices and like and I don't know how we phrase this, not like actively diverting food waste. Or does anyone have any suggestions there on how we say that?
I just put something in the chat as a beginning suggestion, but something that's like could give like create a tool for like better like measurement and like for like food recovery and like preventing it from ending up in landfills, something like that. I think there should just be something about like data collection and like making it more like easily accessible for like places to be able to track that they are like actually making progress on like their food diversion goals, you know, something like that.
Got it. So maybe we could say something here. I'm just adding before, like collecting and providing real-time data for effective food waste management practices that actively diverts food from landfills, if we want to be as explicit as that. If you want to include that landfill wording. Do you think that that encapsulates what you're suggesting there?
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, this is great that we're moving through this relatively fast. So, okay, so that comment has been addressed. Now, just circling back to some of the comments that were made previously around focusing on bigger companies. I think section 1 and section 2 here somewhere we discussed that. I forgot who was it that raised that? Was that Alex? Or okay, yeah. So do you, now that you've had a chance potentially to look a little more Is there anywhere that you would suggest putting that in or adjusting any existing wording or phrasing that we have?
It was just something that I wanted people to think about really, but like the social media section is I think where it caught me the most. Because it is like cute and nice to do like the little challenges and share people's accomplishments around consumerism and things like that. Which I think it's up at 3.1. CE 1.2. Experiment with social media outreach campaigns. And so yeah, I just it might be something that we can address in a different section, but the encouragement of consumerism without other things to back that up it just seems like maybe we're not emphasizing that we know that it's more than consumerism. That's all I was trying to hone on there.
Rachel, I see you have a hand up.
So I did want to address that point. That is something we talked about extensively within the circular economies group. We just tended to address it more in question 4. So while we were addressing things with how to get youth directly involved in paying attention to their consumerism choices, we did acknowledge that especially since at least 2 of the questions talk about disadvantaged communities. In disadvantaged communities, we cannot control what is put on store shelves and what is affordable for us to buy. And sustainable alternatives are often more expensive. So it's just not available to many people who live in disadvantaged communities to actually choose a sustainable option. And we did discuss this, especially within question 4, about how can we address that. And part of addressing that was implementing bans on single-use plastics, so getting corporations and these retailers who use that type of packaging to stop, and then instead take on the sustainable packaging alternatives. It seems to have been lost in translation as in it wasn't directly included in the list, but we talked about multiple ways to go about that. Don't subsidize companies that do use plastic packaging or other wasteful packaging and food waste, and instead subsidizing or giving grants to those that promote sustainable alternatives, so that way they become more affordable or more likely to be purchased by people, and it becomes the more affordable option and things like that. Because absolutely we acknowledge like we almost everything, like it's controlled by who's putting it out rather than the people who are consuming it. So we might be able to change some of the language around that to address it better. But a lot of the issues we're looking at retailers and larger companies is tended to be focused in question 4.
Paige?
I was just going to kind of reiterate Rachel's point, but first, like the bigger picture stuff, I think the reason that we didn't talk a lot about that in the other questions is because they were kind of specifically asking about youth, like specifically, instead of like the bigger places, which they more ask about in question 4. But I guess we could, specifically with Alex talking about like the social media section, we could include something about like making sure that they're using social media to like educate youth on these like more bigger picture things that they might not necessarily have like direct control over, but like for more like knowledge stuff. And then in question 4, more address the specific like company bigger picture issues, since it's asking more about like the bigger food retailers and food services and things like that.
Rachel, do you have a response?
Yeah, no, and again, backing up like what Paige was saying, something else too that we can do with social media is like when we're talking about different types of challenges and getting youth involved, is corporations will often react to when there's like a large outcry, or I guess like the people who consume the products, if they're letting the corporation know, hey, I will not be purchasing from you anymore, cannot change this or that. And then if you want to do something as part of engaging youth, is informing them how they can use their voice to make a change with the companies they purchase from. And so like that's also in a way trying to get also looking at bigger picture, well, how can we contribute towards getting bigger change on a corporate level, on an industry level. To kind of address it in like a two-part way, actually making sure that companies feel the pressure to do it and also have reasons to do so.
Paige.
This is very much bouncing off Rachel, but I guess like since what Rachel just said, I think that that would be good to like specifically say in 1.2 we could have a bullet at the end or in the beginning or something specifically talking about like why we're doing like certain challenges or making sure like you're emphasizing to youth that there's like power in numbers, that these are ways that they can get their voice out to the general public and to these bigger consumers and things by, you know, doing these challenges on social media and more like smaller things, but there's like power in numbers and all of that stuff. I think we could like more explicitly say that towards Alex's point, like in the social media section, even just in a bullet point being like more specific about like they're fun challenges, but like there is a reason behind the fun challenges, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay, yeah. So I think that Paige and Alex, yeah, you both raise key points. I think that social media is kind of inherently like it promotes overconsumption, and it's kind of weird to use that to try to reduce it. So I think what we could do is we could add kind of just another like segment here on the second recommendation that says like creating challenges and workshops around EPA goals to get youth actively involved in EPA work, like Plastic Free Week Challenge. And we could just add something there like that addresses both individual habits and the broader systems that promote like over consumerism. And then maybe I think that this last bullet point on CE 1.2 on experimenting with social media outreach campaigns, it is actually a little vague. So maybe that's where we talk about highlighting the like power in numbers and all of that that you both discussed. So perhaps we could rephrase it to say like highlighting youth who compete challenges on social media with photos and stories to emphasize the explicitly we could say the power in numbers, encourage collective activism, and inspire systemic change beyond the platform. I just typed that up quickly, so I'm not sure if that gets all at what you are referring to and both wanted to include, but yeah, how does that sound?
I think that sounds great.
Okay, perfect. Now our last piece of feedback on circular economy, if I'm not mistaken, was raised on CE 3.3, I believe. And that was, yeah, that was again kind of the first bullet point that Osenega discussed on highlighting how we should have it more kind of like enforced than just addressing and like encouraging food donation. Yeah, does anyone have any thoughts there? This could also just be like a super simple edit where we just kind of change it from like implementing regulation to encourage food donations and conducting outreach to like local restaurants to reduce their food waste or something like that. That's kind of vague off the top of my head. Yeah, Emmanuel.
I just have a question about what enforcement looks like, just because I think about the rules we have on food safety, for example, on food vendors. Those tend to have like a disproportionate impact on, say, like Latino communities. You know, often they face hundreds of dollars in fines. Sometimes they face months in jail. So I'm just kind of a little curious as to how we're thinking about the enforcement piece, because I also don't want to inadvertently end up, uh, uh, I don't think like the carceral system should have like should be disproportionately impacting communities of color. So I just want us to kind of think about how we're thinking about enforcement when it comes to food donations.
Osenega.
I just added these bullet points here to kind of hopefully get at where to suggest what I meant earlier. But Emmanuel, to address your point, I think that's a very valid concern. And I think more work could be done, maybe like even in what I added here to specify what certain food vendors are, because I wouldn't want this to apply to all food vendors or all programs, nonprofits that handle or businesses that handle food. I think there's got to be a certain type of stratification process where it's like, or either we don't require certain businesses below a certain operating capacity to do this, or if there's some mechanism where there's limited requirements based off of their food operations and their capacity. So I think that's a very interesting point, but totally willing to hear more on that.
Emmanuel, did you have anything else to say in response there, or yeah?
Yeah, and obviously I don't think we have to go into the details of in terms of our recommendation, but yeah, maybe we can like just make that part more explicit in terms of like uh of making it known that there might be exemptions essentially for yeah, for types of food vendors, or maybe like change the language of like what we're counting as like a food vendor.
And I mean, it could be something as simple as just saying, adding to what Seneca wrote here of encouraging municipalities to establish programs requiring food vendors and restaurants to donate safe to eat leftover food to local nonprofits for consumption. We could just add something of saying like, while remaining aware of like the potential disproportionate impacts of these effects on like smaller businesses or smaller like I don't know the exact phrasing that we could use there. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I actually think that's spot on. I actually think that's perfect.
And would you say remaining aware of the disproportionate effects of these regulations on like which specific groups?
Yeah, small businesses, just small kind of like everyday vendors. I think that works. Yeah, we could just say small businesses and small food vendors.
Okay, great. Yes, well, I think we got through a lot here. And yeah, I see, I don't know actually who it is, but Anonymous Platypus editing there. So I think that's Osenaga, right? Yeah, okay. So with that, yeah, so do you want to leave because these are kind of a lot. I think some of these can overlap because there's like 5 recommendations and just CE 3.3. Do you see any overlap there that we could kind of combine them? Otherwise, if not, this is something that we could also kind of work on offline a little bit as we work on editing it all. So with that, are there any other comments on circular economy? Oh yeah, Emmanuel.
Yeah, I was just thinking about Christy's comment a little bit more about including something about waste management or landfill management. And my apologies also if we've already added this, but I mean maybe this would be something we can talk about in the AI section, because I think about what are some of the loopholes we have in federal landfill regulations. Like I know that smaller landfills are often exempt from any kind of measuring that happens or any kind of enforcement of regulations. I think there's like a couple of years too, where I think before they even start enforcing certain new regulations that we do, and I think we update those every couple of years. Um, I think they're I think they're due for an update this year actually. So that could be something that we have like AI do in terms of some of those loopholes, like smaller landfills and the uh, number of years we do for before we enforce stuff for larger landfills.
Yeah, I think those are very good points as well. Um, yeah, I'm actually not too familiar if anyone in the circular economy group directly knows if that's included. I think otherwise we could put it in the AI section. if there's not already stuff relating to it now. And just to clarify again what you mean specifically to add there, so you're saying to use AI to kind of like prevent loopholes and stuff, or like what do you mean there?
Yeah, in terms of some of the measuring tools that we use, in terms of if ensuring that we're impact tracking some of our regulations on how we're regulating landfills, especially again like the smaller ones, because those tend to have a lot of exemptions that we have in the United States versus they have in like other countries.
Got it. Cool. Well, I'll note that all down. Um, we can, yeah, continue working on this during the deliberation period. I think that this is a pretty strong place to be, and I'm confident that we might be able to actually get a lot of these recommendations submitted by the end of the day, since we've made a lot of the revisions already. But if anything comes up offline during the break, definitely make sure to jot it down so we can discuss it during deliberations that will occur in just a little over an hour when we resume. And I'll hand it over to Carissa now.
Thanks, Gabriel. Thank you, everyone. This was a great discussion. Since, again, we are running ahead of schedule, do you all want to take this time to review some of the other recommendations that were put forward for environmental justice and climate change? And that way, over the break, the full council, you each will have that opportunity to kind of review, do a little deeper reviewing of each of the new additions, as well as what has already been put forward. It'd be great to hear from some of the members I know who haven't spoken yet today. So again, I'll open this time. We are again ahead of schedule for you all to circle back on climate change and/or environmental justice recommendations.
Yeah, I think that that is a wonderful idea, and it probably will be the best use of time. So that way we have more time to fully review the recommendations after making edits, especially since we spent longer in circular economy. So yeah, actually I'll hand it over to one of maybe another vice chair or chair to facilitate, and I'm going to work on making some of the edits just of the incorporations that we discussed already. So Emmanuel, would you mind facilitating the next section if we return to maybe we'll start going back to climate change first, if you want to facilitate that.
Yeah, I can do that. Awesome. So, as we mentioned, for some of the recommendations that were made for the climate change section, is the agency's regulatory process sufficiently transparent for meaningful, effective engagements with youth, environmental justice, and other communities? Just to briefly go over, we had sections around enhancing transparency through detailed information sharing, strengthening community engagement, empowering youth in diverse communities. Was there anything that folks wanted to add to the section or want to discuss regarding this first charge question? Or it might even be helpful for folks who actually who were in this working group who added to the section. Would love to hear some of the thoughts behind the specific recommendations that you all made, if anyone wants to volunteer. And if not, we're happy to move to the next section for the next charge question in climate change. what are areas of interest to youth communities that the EPA should engage on? What are the most pressing issues in your communities that the agency should focus on or prioritize? We had recommendations regarding to strengthening climate change education, fostering green job opportunities, and enhancing access to grants for funding for environmental projects. And obviously, we read the different recommendations. For that section, is there anything folks want to add or language that they want to change for that? Yes, Paige.
I had more of a question that might be for the EPA and Carissa when I was looking at 2.3 specifically. But as far as the eligibility criteria for environmental grants, is there a reason that they don't already include individual students?
That I do not know, and I'm definitely, that's a question I know I'm happy to take back to the experts here at EPA.
Okay, great. I just think it could be useful to know like if there are any reasons that they don't have eligibility criteria for like certain groups that we might not be aware of.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Paige. Are there any other questions that folks have regarding recommendations for this section, clarifying questions for Carissa that folks want to ask? If not, we can move to the third charge question. What does success look like for the NEYAC? What data or metrics would the group use, if any, to identify successful outcomes for NEYAC engagement? We had recommendations regarding encouraging scholarship programs and environmental careers. I know that was a big topic of discussion for when this came up. We had recommendations regarding performance metrics. How do we quantify influence on policy through clear performance metrics? We had a suggestion around a national conference and resources to start sustainable groups in the schools. Are there any questions, additions that folks want to make regarding this charge question and the recommendations? If there are no questions, we can move on to section 2 about environmental justice. I got lost in my own Google Doc. So the first question that we got for environmental justice was, what barriers to awareness or access exist to empowering and connecting with youth and communities with EJ concerns for agency resources and outreach, such as environmental leadership, careers, internships, etc.? What approaches, processes, or strategies would the NEYAC recommend that would enhance awareness and access? We had recommendations regarding enhancing digital outreach and engagement, engaging with schools and youth organizations, developing user-friendly online resources. For anyone, are there any questions or recommendations you all would make? Could be questions around language, could be clarifying questions for folks in the working group. Does anyone have any comments that they'd like to make? If not, we can go to the second charge question. How can the EPA engage youth in environmental sustainability? How can young people actively promote innovation and implement sustainable ideas? How would you identify youth's vision for a just sustainable future? Some of the recommendations we had were highlighting individual youth climate stories, expand youth engagement and education and sustainability, develop a national EPA climate ideas conference for youth to share ideas, for any of the recommendations that were made in this section, clarifying questions. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add for the recommendations for this charge question? I have my own kind of, maybe this isn't necessarily a clarifying question, but for the enhancing digital outreach engagement, there's a section about collaborating with social media influencers and youth advocates to amplify the EPA's outreach efforts. I guess kind of my question is, are there specific ideas we would like to see influencers, specific campaign ideas we'd like to see them work on? Do we just want to keep it general? Um, do folks have any thoughts on that question? If we want to give specific ideas for how we would like to see that collaboration work.
I'll just jump in here. Yeah, I think that that is a good idea to be more specific. Something not directly related to what you said, but something that I think we should consider just as I'm going through and making just some of the edits that we've talked about throughout these sections is that there's a lot in almost like every section of climate change, circular economy, environmental justice that talk about social media. So I'm just wondering, how we make each section kind of distinct and really help provide kind of like effective recommendations around social media usage, around just saying that the EPA should be on it and like engage with youth. So I think that that's something that's important to consider. And I would totally agree with you, Emmanuel. I think suggesting specific kind of campaigns or actions or ways to use it would be beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think like even when if we want to define youth advocates, do we want to specify, are there youth advocates who are doing really important work on environmental justice in their local communities? Specific work like organizers who are doing that work. If there's influencers whose specific uh beat, I should say, is they tend to cover environmental justice topics in their online content. If that's something that we want to specify or we just want to keep that general, maybe we can probably keep the influencer part general, but we can be a little bit more specific with when it comes to youth advocates. Um, yeah, and I think maybe we can also have an emphasis on, I would love to see more campaigns that are actually rooted in environmental justice communities. It's one thing I think to be talking about an environmental justice community. If it's one thing to be talking about Cancer Alley, for example, when you're like, hundreds, thousands of miles away versus you're doing an actual campaign in Cancer Alley, talking about some of the environmental justice issues there. I know I'd probably want to specify, I would like to see location specific campaigns there.
Yeah, I just want to weigh in on that. I think something that I think is missing from that piece of things is that I know that EPA does put out, grant calls or like for folks to apply for like specifically programs and workshops they're organizing, but not necessarily around the storytelling piece. So I think it'd be really important that communities could actually apply for storytelling grants, which I know has not been put as a recommendation on here, I realize, but I think is really important because producing that kind of content and stuff does require funding and a lot of time and energy, especially from, EJ orgs and from like content creators. So I think it'd be a really solid recommendation if we do have, like some sort of grant process that EPA could put out for storytelling.
I also think building off of that, Christy, I think something else that we could probably do is if there are communications professionals, either with national EPA, the regional offices, if they can provide the storytelling training for local advocates, how do you build a good how do you do really good narrative storytelling on online platforms? I think those kind of trainings too could be something that we could recommend. How do we empower local people with those lived experiences to communicate that?
Yeah, I like that idea a lot because there is like a lot of like local journalism that is mostly how a lot of these stories get out, but they don't really get as supported or amplified on bigger networks. So I think that'd be really great to like have specific language around that.
Yeah, so I think something that we could, if we want to add that, we could have it under 1.1. We could say something like uh providing communication storytelling workshops for advocates in environmental justice communities, Justice 40 communities, if we want to have specific wording.
Yeah, is there a section where there is specifically like where people could apply for grants? I think there was for like workshop for maybe in the circular economy, like for community partnerships. But I wasn't, maybe I have to look this over again.
Yeah, so we could probably put yeah, because I think at the very least the application for funding, maybe that can fall into I know in one of the charge questions for environmental justice we had uh career pathways for people who have kind of more of a entrepreneurship type deal going on. So maybe that could be like language you can change. But yeah, we could probably put oh my God, what did I say before? Let's see, reading, storytelling and communication workshops for advocates. Uh, awesome. Thank you, Gabriel. Awesome. Was there anything else folks wanted to add? Oh, Seneca, I know you had your hand up, I think, before. I'm sorry, I must have missed that.
I did, but it was about the filmmaking fellowships because I thought that was what Christy and you were talking about a little bit with like the grant opportunities for people. Maybe we could one way we could support these local content creators, local journalism. But I'm not sure if that was exactly what you guys were talking about towards the end because you were talking about community partnerships and maybe it wasn't specifically about the social media aspect anymore. But yeah, that was why my hand was raised, but I took it down.
Yeah, I think now that I'm seeing it, I think it would fit under the edutainment programs on 4.1. Potentially like that could be like where we could include language around. But I also see it's under 3.3 where it says offering grants to support environmental sustainability projects. I just think there it'd be nice to add like a specific like storytelling or journalism, like just like words to that section.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair to add that. Or maybe we can probably just change this to community circuit workshop and uh filmmaking grants. Was that what you said, Christy?
Yeah, like yeah, we could say like filmmaking or yeah, story. We could keep storytelling general. I mean, it doesn't have to be just be anything like that.
Is it possible where we could incorporate this under the 2.1 recommendation for creating digital campaign or filmmaking fellowships? Whereas like, or is it something that we do want to separate, like a filmmaking and digital campaign or local journalism fellowship, and there's a grant opportunity without the fellowship?
I think there can be space for both, mostly because I mostly when I think about a fellowship, I think about that usually tends to be a very structured job with a specific purpose versus uh I I think I like having also the idea of having grants as well, because that tends to give a little bit more freedom for folks who want to do that work. But I could be wrong. There's also room for disagreement. Um, were there any other things folks wanted to wrap up in regards to the storytelling communications point we were talking about before? If not, we can move to the next charge question.
And sorry, I'm just jumping in here again. I'm just working on getting all these edits in the document. But for this specific recommendation of the storytelling workshops, where did you all decide it fits best on EJ like 1.1 or moving it down to the edutainment section or elsewhere?
I think we decided to keep it at in the digital outreach and engagement section.
Okay, got it.
All right. So for charge question 3, how should EPA work with corresponding state, local, and or tribal governments to ensure desired on-the-ground impacts and efforts to advance environmental justice comes to fruition? What do youth consider as reliable and impactful engagement and indicators of success? For the recommendations we had tended to fall around developing continuous outreach programs, not just one-off events, launching assessment outreach programs pre and post-event to assess quantitative and qualitative impact, facilitating youth engagement and environmental decision-making. For any of the recommendations that are on this list, do folks have any clarifying questions they have for Chris or the EPA? Do folks have language that they would like to add or recommendations that they would like to add for this charge question? And I'll give some time for folks to read through it again too. Seneca.
I was looking at this specifically 3.2 about the pre-post events. If there's a way we can add some language to suggest that what they learn from the pre-event surveys will actually be incorporated before they implement whatever outreach program it is, because I think it wouldn't be as impactful to have a pre-event survey and then get like, really good feedback and then not actually incorporate it in the outreach program.
Thanks for your thoughts. Here, we're doing this event anyway.
Oh, wait, what? Sorry, what?
Oh, no. I just meant like, like, thanks for these suggestions, but we'll still do our event our way.
Yeah. Like, that's kind of my concern, like, because I know how that could, I guess maybe I'm maybe too scared, but I see how that could happen. And I'm like, I want community members to not feel like they're just like literally what you just said, to feel like, okay, we're checking off a box to say we asked you guys, but we didn't actually incorporate the feedback before we implemented it. So yeah, just so we don't waste anybody's time, I think it would be a good thing to actually implement that pre-event survey feedback.
Yeah, maybe this is something where we can probably change the language to include that as part of their brainstorming process, as part of their event planning process, outreach process, however, whatever stage we want to have that in, to specify that as part of their event planning process that they have to do kind of a pre-event survey. Like, hey, we have a rough idea of what what we want to do here in this community. What are all of y'all's thoughts on that? I think maybe I don't know. What do you think about that, Seneca?
Yeah, I think that's really good. My thing is like I think we could incorporate that wording right in the first bullet point, actually.
Yeah.
Like, and it actually, could you put? I wish you could like literally say what you just said and put it in there, and then we'll work about from the wording from there. But I think that's a good place to work from. What you just said.
Yeah. As part of EPA's sorry, I'm not a very good typer. Apologies for that. Event planning and outreach process. How does that work?
And then maybe I'm also not a great typer. And then, sorry, you guys can hear me type so loud too, probably. Incorporating feedback in there.
There's also a lag in the Zoom, the screen sharing, just so folks know I didn't like just stop in the middle of that suggestion.
Yeah. What I added there maybe just think to get that as well.
Awesome. That's an awesome suggestion. Look at that teamwork. So do folks have anything else regarding this particular point that they want to bring up, or regarding something else in the recommendations that they want to add? If not, happy to move on to the next charge question for environmental justice. What best practices, technologies, and/or platforms are best positioned to connect youth to environmental resources the EPA has available, including but not limited to green space access/preservation, cleanup efforts, grant opportunities, policy developing opportunities, particularly for communities with EJ concerns? The recommendations that we had made were regarding edutainment programs, increasing physical presence and regional office visibility, effective use of social media. I know there was a little bit of discussion with that in regards to the filmmaking grants, and making those accessible for communities. I know we added that into one of the previous points. So I just want to make a note of that beforehand, but I'll give folks a couple of minutes to read through these recommendations again. But I'll ask just now if there are any clarifying questions, language they would like to add, or new recommendations that they would like to make in regards to this charge question. If there are no recommendations that folks want to add, I am happy to move on to the next charge question, if everyone else is okay with that. All right, next charge question. What topics relating to environmental justice are most urgent to youth? We had recommendations regarding green jobs and educational opportunities, clean air and water, mobility, and Rachel's suggestions for protections for sacrifice zones. Only thing I will personally add, I would like to change mobility just to include transportation and mobility, to make that slight change. if folks are okay with that.
I think that makes sense. Also, yeah, just jumping in here around section 5.2. I just wanted to check in with Rachel. I know that you had comments here on wanting to include more details around like the sacrifice zones, but also talk about kind of this like partnership community liaison thing. I want to make sure that I like fully get that down in words. So I kind of like put up what you were saying here. This is like really, really rough. Um, what do you think of this so far? I don't know if that encapsulates everything that you wanted to include there, but I just wanted to check.
No, yeah, I think you translated what I was trying to include like very well into the recommendation. I know we've talked about this in the prior meeting where they had discussed wanting to give mostly the carrot and not the stick when it came to industry issues. But I really wanted at this moment to really advocate for with the EPA stronger enforcement of policies and where the industries are affecting air and water quality, and really laying into how do we make sure there's enforcement and then feedback into the community that's being affected. Because when we're soft with our language and when we're soft with enforcement, the industries continue to do it rather than laying off, like stopping. So, and for example, for those who like may not understand where I'm coming from with this, is like one of the LNG companies, they had like 2,000 permit violations within their first year of operation. And instead of like stopping the permit violations, they just put in a request to raise their emission, how much they could put off. And so it's like I really believe in using stronger language and incorporating, okay, what does non-compliance enforcement look like? How do we make sure that this is really tied down and taken care of for those communities that are affected and those environments that are impacted by this?
Thank you so much for that, Rachel. And yeah, I would also just recommend for folks, as we're going through these recommendations, if there was a specific suggestion that you made and you want to give additional context for that, please feel free to do so. And feel free to provide that context. But are there any other additions that the folks would like to make to this section? If not, I'm happy to move on to circular economy if that works for everybody. Awesome. So the first charge question for circular economy, how can the EPA and its partners, such as the local governments, nonprofit organizations, industry groups, or academia, more effectively engage young people to help reduce food waste at home and abroad? We had recommendations for the charge question regarding school and educational outreach, experimenting with social media outreach campaigns, changing the narrative around food. Are there any questions, comments, clarifying questions for the EPA that folks would like to make regarding this charge question? If not, let's move on to charge question 2. How can EPA's efforts to manage food as a material in the most sustainable and efficient way be improved to benefit and work for youth? We had recommendations regarding enhancing physical presence in community partnerships, skill-based training and opportunities, and community building and building trusted partnerships. For this section, and again, give folks some time to read through them again, but are there any questions, language that they would like to add for this charge question or questions for Chris and the EPA? Paige.
I had brought this up earlier, but I think that we could either further differentiate 2.3 and 3.2 or combine them into one thing, because currently both of them are talking about like building trusted partnerships with like people in the communities, but there isn't like a ton of differentiation between the two. So either we could combine one of them and choose like which section to put it under, or like further differentiate like what the difference between those two answers determining based on the question are.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think especially when you look at the last uh the last bullet point under 2.2 about partnering with local business organizations, like I think that one could easily fall into 2.3, for example. Something that we could probably do is for 2.2 specifically focusing on the training aspect of that. And maybe 3.3, that's kind of more broadly the partnerships angle of that. Or if we want to just combine it all. I'm honestly personally fine with combining it all. I love simplicity, so
Yeah, I know it's relating to like the second section as well, because it's 2.3 and then 3 and then 3.2, I think, were the two that were both like community engagement and trusted partnership stuff. So we could just combine them or like determine maybe one question it would make more sense to have like that answer versus another, but yeah.
yeah, I mean, we could maybe like a slight language change we can add to um combine the two together is the EPA should build trusted partnerships to provide skill-based training for young people
Oh yeah, I'm
and
specifically
younger
talking
communities.
about 2.3 and 3.2 instead of 2.2. Like the next section down from
Oh,
the circular economy thing. Because they're both like they
Combining
both
all three or like 2.3 and just 3.3.
wait, say that again. Sorry, I didn't hear what you
Oh
said.
yeah. Wait, so combining 2.3, sorry, I'm just jumping in again. I keep editing on the document. But yeah, so combining 2.3 and 3.3, or also
3.2.
combine 3.2, sorry. And then okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
I'm not sure which one it would like fall better under, either question 2 or question 3. But I feel like both of them are pretty much getting at like the same general ideas. So either we could differentiate them more or just kind of combine them into one and decide which question it falls better under.
I mean, it looks like the third charge question deals with engagement specifically, so my guess would probably be leaning towards that one.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. So we could just kind of like I think most of the stuff that under 2.3 is like kind of very similar to stuff under 3.2. There might be like some specific things that we could just kind of like add next to some of the bullet points that like are similar to what they're saying, but I think that they're both getting at like the general same answer, just maybe different specific details or examples.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to highlight this one. Uh, And then let's move to charge question 3 and then there kind of see which ones we move under, which ones we kind of collapse together if there's overlap, if that sounds good. Cool. So for charge question 3, how can outreach and education on making the most of food and preventing food from going to waste at home be most effective in disadvantaged communities? We had building connections to food, community engagement and trusted partnerships, addressing food deserts and their consequences. Before I go back to the questions about 2.3 and 3.2 in this section, are there any other things in this section that folks want to add or discuss? If not, okay, so it looks like for 2.3 we had for trusted partnerships, we had establishing connections with community members, grassroots organizations, and others that can have a direct impact on the community. Working with schools to establish gardens for hands-on learning environments that foster a sense of responsibility and connection to nature. Supporting sustainable agriculture initiatives in areas affected by environmental degradation and climate change. And it looks like for 3.2, we have working directly with community-based organizations and schools to establish educational opportunities on children's health and food-related topics, combining principles of sustainability, STEAM education, and cultural competency to ensure emotional connection and relevance to diverse backgrounds, and supporting initiatives for community and home gardens, especially with food plants to handle the local climate. I think honestly the last bullet point in 2.3 feels the most distinctive out of all of them compared to the first two. So I would be fine with just moving that last bullet point to 3.2. And honestly just like cutting the first two, but I don't know, what do folks think about that?
That's exactly what I was thinking as well when I was reading the bullet points. I think that definitely the last one has like the most different stuff from 3.2 in general. So we can just kind of, I guess if everyone agrees, we can just cut it and kind of put it under 3.2 and then get rid of the other 2 bullet points that are on top of it for 2.3.
I would totally agree. I think it's always better in these recommendations to have it like more concise and like effective than having it redundant. So yeah, we could just do that now and cut it. And then so we'll move this bullet point up to 3 point or sorry, wait, where is it? The other section?
3.2.
3.2.
Yeah, okay. 3.2 and just add it in as a fourth one. Do you think that makes the most sense?
Yeah, I think so. Awesome. Thank you so much, Gabriel, and Paige for that, for flagging that for us.
So yeah, quickly, I guess before we go into soon like the break coming up, I just wanted to flag again, I'm sorry we're jumping around a lot. But for EJ 5.4 and the protections for sacrifice zones, this is the one from Rachel. Rachel, I also wanted to flag that I just made some edits on this one as well. I wanted to check, do we think that this fits in most effectively under section EJ5 on environmental justice issues that are most urgent to youth, or where do we think that this fits in most effectively? Because it kind of has some parts from every section. I mean, and maybe it also just works there too. Yeah, if ever wants to take a second to look through that.
I think that it works there if we want to keep it there. I can't think of any other section that it would fit best under currently, but since what topics are most urgent to youth is so broad, I think it could definitely just stay under that section.
Right, right.
I would
'Cause
agree because it also kind of touches on something that I think is really important for youth is that they want to make sure that there's an accountability piece to the regulations that they do. And the way that tends to manifest is our sacrifice zones and communities that are essentially we kind of throw under the bus for progress for um, other kind of climate regulations. Um, at least that was kind of my thinking in terms of why I think I agree with Paige. I think this kind of fits into charge question 5 because it kind of gets into, you know, young people, I think more than kind of any specific topic regarding climate, they just want to know that the regulations that they're making work and that they're working equitably across areas.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah, I was kind of thinking that that's probably where it fits as well. So we'll go ahead and leave it there. So yeah, to be mindful of time, I went through and I think I have incorporated so far everything that we've discussed in the document on the yeah, this NEYAC final letter. So everything in red, those are the new additions that we've added. And then if it's there's a strike through, that means that we removed it to another section. So now as we are about to enter break, if everyone could take a look through that, that would be amazing. And I'll hand it over to Carissa now.
Sure. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, everyone, Emmanuel, Paige, all of you for this great discussion. I appreciate the live edits. I think this will be really helpful for everyone as we do go into break, that you have the opportunity to review. Because as we do come back from break, you all will be having your final deliberations and actually voting on which recommendations that you do want to put forth to the agency. I'll also note too, if there are additional edits, you can always ask that a specific work group go back and make further additions, further edits as necessary if need be. So with that, we will go ahead and take a break. I am going to break us for 30 minutes because I know there was a great amount of conversation edits. So I just want to make sure everyone has enough time to review before we reconvene. So with that, we will break for 30 minutes and we will come back at 2:50 Eastern time. Thank you. right, welcome back, everyone. You all, for those who aren't on camera yet, if you all either can put your camera on or give me maybe a thumbs up to let me know that you are back. We'll go ahead and move into the final deliberations and vote on the first set of charge questions and recommendations on behalf of you all that you'll put forward to EPA to consider. So with that, as I noted, we're going to move into the final deliberations. We have Gabriel and Kira who will lead and facilitate this part of the agenda. We only need a majority vote to move forward with a recommendation. We will go through each of the recommendations as in like C1, like 1.2 to 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and vote that way on each of those. And let me just pull up here. And so with that, we can, there is this opportunity, I will clarify that you all can still continue to make edits on these recommendations. So if there is an edit that you all want to make, say, for example, to 1.1, you can share that edit during this time, and then the council would vote on the revised recommendation. So that revised recommendation would be what would be put forward to the agency. Again, you can vote to, vote not to have anything, vote on which recommendations you want to send forward. Not all the recommendations have to go forward to EPA. That is all up to you. So with that, I will let you all begin the deliberations and the final vote. Gabriel and Kira, I'll turn it over to you.
Got it. Thank you so much, Carissa. Yeah, so with that, before we get into the actual voting, I just wanted to take a moment and check that since everyone has read through the document now and these edits, are there any points that anyone would like to raise, or anything that they notice when reading through it that they'd like to edit? Yeah, Kira.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to call out that I saw that there were additions about specifically gas-fired power plants, LNG, calling out specific energy sources. And my preference would be to keep this tight to EPA. We have existing regulation in the country that we talk about as something that we'd like to see enforced, which I absolutely agree with. But I think the focus on specific energy sources is misdirected and not necessarily our place to be focusing on.
And you are referring to the 5.4 recommendation?
Yeah, I'm referring to the addition of EJ 5.4 and then also section EJ 5.2 with the specific call out to the gas-fired power plants, but no other energy sources.
Emmanuel?
Yeah, so I think so I was the one who read that section, which is why I'm responding. Basically the recommendation is that to create a rule for existing gas-fired power plants. The EPA came out with rules for new existing gas-fired power plants, but we do not have rules yet in place for existing ones. So that was the reason why I made that addition rather than singling out a specific energy source. It's meant to be providing more complete rules around these plants in general.
I guess just to respond briefly to that, completely understand where you're coming from and the intention behind it. I just would like, I guess, to remind us that we are youth in this case. I don't think any of us are gas-fired power plant experts or LNG experts. Yeah, that is, I guess, my point here is the EPA has had a process in place. And again, I'm fully in support of us saying that we advocate for the enforcement of existing regulation. But as I don't think any of us have done the due diligence and the full scientific process, my level of comfort is I won't be voting to support those additions. Yeah.
Rachel?
So, I know I'm the one who included the one on LNG. That is something that is a lived experience. It is something that is affecting deeply our communities and especially our tribal nations down here. So I have done the research behind that. If you're not comfortable voting on it because the word LNG is included in there, despite the fact that it is specifically being called out for the damage it is doing and the perspective that we're representing, I'm fine with leaving it out and maybe when there's deeper talks, because there are many people in our community who talk about these issues. But at the same time, it was brought in because it is a significant one that we are living through, that we are directly feeling the impacts of. It wasn't just included just because in that case. So I would like leave it in, leave it out. I'm just letting it be known that I did do my due diligence when it came to researching that, and I do have the research behind that.
Heard and respectfully understood. We did have a long process in each of these working groups. I'm part of the EJ working group myself. And I think that kind of a last minute addition of a specific energy source, my issue is with the specific energy source call out, not with the underlying intention.
Okay, so in that case, is the council okay with potentially just removing that clause and just leaving it as prioritizing climate solutions that safeguard vulnerable communities and ecosystems?
I would like the phrasing for false solutions to be left in. So even if you just leave out LNG itself, keeping the phrasing itself as is, because that is a very significant issue. We're in a time where there's a lot of different things coming up, and we're seeing a lot of things touted as solutions when in reality they come at severe cost to our to indigenous homelands, to lower income communities, to disadvantaged communities. And it's important to understand why we're using this phrasing and where it's coming in. So even if you want to use avoiding or understanding what false solutions are, and navigating away from those as we move forward, because you can't replace one huge issue with another huge issue.
Got it. Are there any responses to that? Asada?
I do agree with Rachel in leaving in the terminology of false solutions. And I know at this point, these are bullets, and we could further explain it when we draft it in letter form and when we work to complete that final recommendation, just so that there's clarity around that point. But I do think including that terminology is very important because, as Rachel mentioned, we have a lot of communities that are being affected by these false solutions, and they're not benefiting the communities, they're actually harming us worse. So I do want to keep that in there. I agree.
Okay, so in that case, we could plan an page, yes.
Just gonna second Asada. I think that taking out the LNG part but keeping in the rest of the terminology is good for just not calling out a specific thing, and because it's more broadly applicable to like other issues that aren't LNG. It's like doesn't specifically address one specific one. It can apply to the vast false solutions that end up going into play.
Okay, perfect. So with that, are there any other comments that or points that anyone wants to bring up on these recommendations before we enter the voting period?
On EJ 4.1, this was the edutainment aspect, I believe. Just for a working definition of that, it's like or at least if the definition is very is understood, I think maybe the last bullet point, I'm kind of I know it was funny because I was the one reading this, but even when I was reading through it, I was kind of having a hard time seeing exactly how entertainment is related to that last bullet point about centralizing or even the hosting competitions. I only, in my mind, maybe it's just my understanding being limited of the definition. It really only seems like the first one is about edutainment. So just that was my thing that I noticed when going through.
Would you suggest like removing or editing those points, or maybe just retitling the section?
I'm leaning towards kind of retitling the section because I wouldn't like want us to remove the points. At this point, I mean, they're there for a reason. I think it's just if the right phrasing is edutainment, maybe it's something else that we can use, edutainment and website, but that only gets to the third point. Maybe it's like, how can we group these if we don't use the word edutainment at all? Because in my mind, it's hard for me to see how they're even related.
Maybe like interactive education programs or something. It's kind of vague. Does anyone have any other suggestions there or on the title? I mean, what do we think of just saying kind of like interactive education programs, multimedia education programs? I don't know. Learning initiatives, education initiatives. I'm just throwing out a bunch of options here.
No, I appreciate it. I think part of the issue is that even if we do call it like a multimedia initiative, about the competitions aspect or a learning initiative, then it's like, is that something that really is related to the idea of hosting competitions? Maybe this is a smaller issue. I don't know if it's super important right now for us to tackle. This is just something that I wanted to bring up for the sake of clarity. If, whoever's down the line is going to be reading this and looking at it, I don't want them to be confused as well to see like, oh, what's the overarching recommendation here?
Okay, got it. So maybe what we can do is we could just title it like interactive education programs for now, and then we can still take the vote on it, but change it if we want later. Do you think that's good for now? Because maybe it's the edutainment thing if people don't know what that is.
Yeah, I think that works for now. Just, I guess the word edutainment might not be in everybody's vocabulary.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. And then are there any
Before
other
you
things? Oh yeah.
Sorry, Dee.
Go ahead.
Asada. I just wanted to add if okay, I see you put it there. Never mind, because I was going to say, if you still, those who recommended that we do edutainment, if you wanted to explicitly put that when we do the letter form and explaining bullet point number 1, I feel like that would be effective as well. If you want to just specify that to that specific bullet, and then the interactive education programs encompasses the competitions as well as the website resources. Maybe that could be a way to address that.
Yeah, so just to make sure I understand what you're saying to do what exactly? Like just when voting out, mention the specific bullet or what? I kind of missed that there.
Sorry, yes, if they wanted to, the people that recommended the edutainment program specifically, if you wanted to incorporate that point specifically into the first bullet,
Oh, I
do
see.
the letter
Yeah.
format, fully elaborate on that piece, maybe that could work as well.
Okay. Yep. I think that makes sense. So do we want to do that, like creating short, engaging, maybe like we could put the edutainment, I don't know how you spell that, videos, and we'll just put that in there to keep it. Does everyone want to do that? Okay. I cannot spell. So Asenaga, you're gonna have to comment that in for me because I do not know how you spell edutainment. Okay. Any last comments or suggestions before we'll enter really quickly in the next like 4 minutes? Okay, Paige.
I just had a quick question specifically for Kiera, because I know that she brought up questions for 5.2 and 5.4. I know we went over the 5.4 one, but was there any potentially problematic wording or anything that you thought was an issue in 5.2?
Yeah, I called out the gas-fired power plants there. Basically anything that's going to call out a specific energy source, I have an issue with.
Okay, so we could just, if everyone's okay with that, we could get rid of like that specifically, but then keep all of the other wording with like general stuff, just so it's not specifically targeting one industry, but it still kind of talks about the broad problems that might be in other industries too, but not calling out a specific one.
Agree with that. And also on that note, do we want to leave in on their like stricter Clean Air and Water Act enforcement? Like that's okay to call it that specifically. Yeah, I'll put the version of this without it included in the chat.
Yeah, my issue is solely with calling out the specific energy source. It's not with the underlying message at all.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think we could keep the Clean Air and Water Act stuff since it's, it's an act that they've already put in place. So obviously enforcement of that would make sense and would be something that would make sense to enforce since they've kind of already made that themselves and want to enforce that kind of thing.
Perfect. Okay. Anything else? Any other? Oh yeah, Emmanuel.
I don't mean to be difficult, but I might push back a little bit on changing the language to get rid of gas-fired power plants. I mean, there's a very specific reason for why it was mentioned. Again, the agency itself came out with new rules for new gas-fired power plants. This was meant to talk about creating a stronger enforcement for existing gas-fired power plants and gas. I mean, I think it's fair to call out a specific energy source specifically because of its impact on the climate crisis. I mean, methane is, I just feel like I personally wouldn't feel comfortable getting rid of that language, but I guess I'll leave it up to how other folks think.
Okay. And then Rachel.
So I would like to back up Emmanuel on that point. Even if we have to put in an extra bullet point to specifically look at how that is applied, because again, he's bringing up that this is something they've already brought a ruling in on, but they left out a key component. So it'd be important to include that key component here to let them know that it is an issue.
Got it. Okay.
Just want to make like a fourth bullet point saying existing gas-powered power plants and then like needing to include it within the current ruling, but it is important to make sure that that is highlighted since it wasn't addressed before.
Okay, Alex.
I was just going to also say adding another bullet point might be fine, and also including in there the context behind the initiative, just to make it very clear of what the intention is, and maybe even adding a little bit extra of just educating on the harmful effects of that specific, just so that we are all aware of that it's very specific and important to us.
Okay, and then briefly to Paige.
I was gonna say maybe to kind of like put all of that together, we could specifically talk about like an act or something that the EPA has done to like further regulate or further do things, like something that they have already put in place, and then discuss that specifically instead of just the general industry, because that's also not very specific. But if we have like specific comments or something on how they've decided to tackle that, that might be something that's like also just a more specific recommendation.
Okay, got it. Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of debate going on with this. I'm not sure the best way that we can incorporate it. We could potentially, since it sounds like this might be a longer conversation, unless anyone knows like the specific act that we can mention here, we could just take this to vote and then if we want to edit it later, we could do that as well. I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. Are there any last ideas on how to resolve that, or any pressing suggestions that we have before we start voting? Okay, perfect. Yeah, so in that case, what we're gonna do for the voting period, so just to remind everyone on the process of how it works, we need just a majority for the recommendation to go through. So that is 8 people, I believe, yeah, because we're 15, right, Carissa? Okay, yep. So that's 8 people for it to go forward. We're on Zoom. I don't know if we could do the poll thing, or maybe what we'll do is you could raise your hand, like the little Zoom hand. That might be the best way to do that. Unless, Carissa, do you have any suggestions on how to take the votes online?
I don't, unless you and Kiara want to just go through a roll call and just. I think that might be tedious.
Yeah,
But
you know what we can do actually? I'll put in the chat like just the specific recommendation, and you could thumbs up it with your reaction, because then we can see the count there. That's probably the best, so we don't have to do the full roll call every time. Maybe that'll work.
I think that will definitely work. Again, you can always vote. If there's a certain edit that wants to be made or needs to be made, you can always vote that. You'll vote on this recommendation moving forward in light of a edit being made. So again, you do not have to vote on all of the recommendations. I mean, yes, as a council you have to vote, but you yourself do not have to vote if you don't feel comfortable on a certain recommendation moving forward. So.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Yeah, is it a roll call like better so we know who specifically is voting? I guess we might be able to see it through Zoom too. Do you have any advice there?
I think at least a roll call, I guess, maybe you wouldn't see it, but you'll hear if someone says yay or nay. If that works.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, maybe we could do the chat, but then if you want to say additional stuff, maybe that'll be the best. If you want to say additional stuff, then we could call you so that way you could express additional views like to the council. So yeah, Kira, yeah, I'm missing people on the roll call. Yeah, so I think it's probably best to do the chat here in case the audio doesn't go through. Okay, so sorry for those technical confusions there. But to start off, we are gonna let's start with climate change, just on the document at the top there of part 1. And we're gonna go through each recommendation as in like CC 1.1 and then like CC 1.2. And we can give everyone a second to read through that for each one, but we'll try to go through this faster to be respectful of everyone's time. So with that, let's take the vote on the first one of CC 0.1.1, enhanced transparency through detailed information sharing. I'm just going to go ahead and put that in the chat. And then if you are for it, just do the reaction with the thumbs up. And then against, you could do thumbs down. Okay, so that passes. So next, we are going to Kira, we could switch off each one. Yeah, do you want to read the next?
Yeah, are you still gonna put it in the chat? Because we're voting now on CC 1.2, strengthening community engagement.
Okay, and that passes. Next, we are voting on CC 1.3, empower youth and diverse community participation. And that passes. Sorry, Rachel, I see that you just had a comment there.
Not a comment. I'm sorry. How are we deciding to vote on these again? We're just commenting in the document?
So in the chat, what we're doing, if you can let me know if you can't access the chat, but we just have each recommendation we're putting out in the chat, and then you just are thumbs upping it. So that way we can see the name and stuff and the total number.
All right, I can see it. It wasn't popping up. It was lagging on my end. So I have
Okay, great. And let me know anyone also if you have any trouble there. Okay, so I will put the next one in the chat. I'm curious if you want to call the vote.
Yep, now on to CC 2.1, strengthen climate change education.
That passes again. Next, CC 2.2, foster green job opportunities. That passes.
And on to CC 2.3, enhance access to grants and funding for environmental projects.
That passes. On to CC 3.1, encourage scholarship programs and environmental careers. And keep in mind for these ones, we're going to vote on it with the red additions that we just added today. So that passes.
And CC 3.2, performance metrics.
And that passes. Onto CC 3.3, national conference and resources to start sustainability groups in schools. And yeah, I know we're going through these fast, so if you have any comment or we miss your hand or anything you want to bring anything up, just unmute yourself too in case we don't see it. So that also passes.
Okay, moving into part 2, environmental justice. So EJ 1.1, enhance digital outreach and engagement. And we're voting on this with the addition in red.
That passes. Next one, EJ 1.2, engage schools and youth organizations. That passes.
EJ 1.3, develop user-friendly online resources.
That passes. Okay. EJ 2.1, highlight individual youth climate stories. Also passes.
EJ 2.2, expand youth engagement in education and sustainability.
And that passes. EJ 2.3, develop the National EPA Climate Ideas Conference for youth to share ideas. Actually, I'm just going to suggest on this one, let's just say develop National EPA Climate Ideas Conference because it's kind of redundant there. Okay, and that passes.
EJ 3.1, develop continuous outreach programs, not just one-off events.
And that passes. Next, EJ 3.2, launch assessment outreach programs pre-post event to assess quantitative and qualitative impact. A bit of a long title there too, so okay, that passes.
EJ 3.3, facilitate youth engagement in environmental decision-making.
And that passes. Moving on to 4.1. Oh, Seneca, I saw you made comments there. Do you have suggestions on the final title?
I only made those comments just so we could vote on it. Like, it wasn't something that was set in stone, but I think what I put here is what I would suggest.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm just gonna edit this a bit. Just so it's in the same format. Okay, so yeah, so EJ 4.1, public facing education and engagement initiatives. And that passes.
EJ 4.2, increase physical presence and regional office visibility.
And that also passes. EJ 4.3, effective use of social media. And that passes.
EJ, sorry, I lost it. 5.1, green jobs and educational opportunities.
That passes. EJ 5.2, clean air and water.
If I could just make a comment on this, I do think that it's a bit of a shame that we've had so many basically consensual, unanimous provisions until this very last minute, where after we've done the work group work, after we've had discussions in private, we're now taking this opportunity to bring up more controversial topics in the public space. I don't support the addition being made at this last minute, so I'm going to be voting against it based on the fact that I think that this should have been done and brought up for fuller discussion in work group, where we could have ironed out language privately and between ourselves.
Are there any additional comments, Emmanuel?
I would just like to mention that I did bring this up in the work group.
These were brought up a couple of different times, so I'm not sure where the communication was dropped in, but I do remember it coming up.
Yes, but they weren't in the proposed language until today.
They were.
Okay. So seeing that there's a bit of debate over this one, what we can do is we can choose not to pass it. We can conditionally pass it or make any specific edits there. Or we could consider adjusting this later on. So I want to take any other comments here. And also make sure that everyone votes. Okay, so this so EJ 5.2 does have a majority. So EJ 5.2 does pass.
EJ 5.3, transportation and mobility.
And this one passes. Okay, so next is EJ 5.4. Protections for sacrifice zones. And this one passes.
Moving on to part 3, circular economy, CE 1.1, school and educational outreach.
And this one passes. Moving on to CE 1.2, and apologies, we're going a little long here. Experiment with social media outreach campaigns. And that passes.
CE 1.3, changing the narrative around food.
And that passes. CE 2.1, a physical presence and community partnership. And that passes.
CE 2.2, skill-based training and opportunities.
And that passes. I just want to flag here that we're moving CE 2.3 down and incorporating in other sections and deleting the first two since they were already included elsewhere. So we're not going to vote on that one. And we're going to move on to CE 3.1, building connections to food. And let me get that in the chat. There we go. Okay. That passes.
CE 3.2, community engagement and trusted partnerships.
That passes. CE 3.3, addressing food deserts and their consequences. That passes.
CE 4.1, plastic pollution and reliable recycling.
That passes. CE 4.2, grant programs and community building. That passes.
CE 4.3, utilizing AI.
And make sure everyone votes here as well. Okay. So this one is close. I want to make sure everyone votes. Are there any comments that people want to bring up here?
Yeah, happy to make a comment. Just thinking about the emissions that are associated with artificial intelligence, I don't feel totally comfortable putting this forward without a serious caveat that this is something that's emerging and we should definitely not be scared of emerging technology. However, if it has an increased environmental footprint, such as the data that's coming out of large tech companies that says that they might not meet their sustainability goals anymore, then I'm not super comfortable with advocating for this as a non-AI expert.
I did not even think about that initially, so I actually would agree with that as well. Are there any additions that we want to make to this one in order to adjust that, or do we want to just let this not pass, I guess?
One comment in order to address that would be if we could revise the language to say promote innovations in AI technology. as someone with the background, a lot of the sustainability pieces of it really are tied to corporate giants who are using it for far other purposes that are determined by a market. There are several smaller companies leveraging these tools and resources to benefit and address the system of food waste, and especially for consumers that otherwise may be inhibited from understanding what exactly they should do in order to address the problem. AI provides an opportunity for them to gain some sort of direction when there is otherwise political, not the political will in order to define that and aid consumers for themselves.
Okay. Do you have any suggestions on how to rephrase that? Otherwise, we could potentially hold this and edit it later.
Rather than maybe necessarily that first bullet point saying using AI-powered systems, maybe it could be promote AI-based innovations. There are other ways of using AI technologies without necessarily investing very, very significantly into the actual hardware that is causing the additional emissions. And there also could be a potential point of also maybe adjusting the focus too of the last bullet point, rather than collecting and providing real-time data, maybe instilling a certain methodology to track how much methodology and reporting system so that organizations are tracking how much they're using, rather than necessarily that falling on the EPA in order to divert that level of resources and I guess hardware intensive emissions towards this sort of cause.
Okay, I did not fully get the last part of what you were saying there. But do you want to, can you leave it in a comment as a document actually, or in the chat as well? And does anyone have any responses or comments there? I know we're going over time, but it'd be good to make all these edits now. Yeah, Colton?
Yeah, so I'm just looking at it from a national security perspective. And when we talk about promoting certain innovation systems without clarifying or delineating, are these, from the private market? Some of these systems could be propped up by governments or entities across the world that have an underlying agenda or threat against the common good of the American people. And I think that should be our focus. So with it just being a broad stroke in promoting certain systems without defining where those systems come from or what we're directly looking at, I'll be a no vote on this.
Got it. Okay, so we could potentially make these edits quickly, but I know that we are low on time, so we could choose not to pass it, and then it wouldn't be included in the recommendations. Osenaga, did you have a quick comment there? I saw your hand go up.
Really quickly, I like that idea of thinking about it further later. Maybe we could change the language to just say a cautious consideration of AI rather than a promoting or should leverage. I think all these out statements are also the reasons why there's a lot of drawback or a lot of feedback that's against this.
Okay. So just after incorporating the edits here, we could take a quick vote on this. I mean, it looks like this is probably not going to pass. So in that case, yeah, so this is the only recommendation that does not pass, unless there's anything else that members want to say on it. So it won't be included in the final recommendations. I'm just going to make sure I get everyone's vote correct again. So I'm just going to put it in the chat one more time. Okay, yep, so that does not pass. Great. Well, I mean, amazing progress, everyone. I mean, I know that we've all been working almost weekly or bi-weekly in our work group meetings and 2 separate work group meetings. And we're going a little bit over time here. But I mean, it's amazing that we got these recommendations done in less than a year. And I think they're really solid recommendations. So I will hand it over to Chris. I mean, I thank you for all of your help to everyone here. And yeah, I'll give it to Carissa now.
Thanks, Gabriel. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you each taking the time to vote, to discuss, to deliberate each of the recommendations you all put forward. It's great to see the seriousness, the commitment that you've put forward. So with that, thank you again. I know you all will work on finalizing that final letter that will be sent to EPA with the past recommendations. Right now, I'd like to move towards our closing remarks. I'd like to welcome and introduce EPA's Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, Policy, and Strategic Engagement, Rosemary Mbakari. This is Rosemary's second tour at EPA, having previously served as the Deputy Associate Administrator for the Public Engagement and Environmental Education Office during the Obama-Biden administration. Rosemary is a native of Jackson, Mississippi, and a proud HBCU graduate of Spelman College, where she earned her bachelor's degree in economics. So with that, I will turn it over to Rosemary.
Thanks so much, Carissa. And I just want to second Lizette and say I am amazed by this team too. I obviously joined on the back end of your deliberations as you talk through this, and it's just phenomenal to see all the great work that you all are doing. So I just wanted to start by saying that. But again, good afternoon. As Carissa said, I'm Rosemary Mbakari. I am EPA's Deputy Chief of Staff for Strategy, Policy, and Strategic Engagement. Again, thank you all for the incredible work that you put forth today and over the past several months in drafting and deliberating and having a final vote on the recommendations to address the NEYAC's inaugural charge questions on environmental justice, climate change, food loss and waste, as well as recycling. Administrator Regan has said this before, and I'll just reiterate it again, is that he believes and he is committed to ensuring that young people have a seat at the table here at EPA. And it's through this collaboration that we're really able to make some real strides in our collective mission to ensure that future generations have access to clean water, clean air, safe lands to live on. And we're doing all that in a way that is fair and inclusive. Under this administration, the Biden administration, EPA has been tasked with deploying over $100 billion in resources from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. And this funding has presented such a historic opportunity and a historic moment for EPA to invest in communities and better serve communities. And because of this moment, I really want to lean in and highlight that your individual perspectives and experiences are invaluable to providing EPA with the innovative solutions that will help to build a cleaner, a healthier, and a more equitable communities across the country. The recommendations that you all are putting forth in the coming weeks are really rooted in EPA's foundational principles of science, integrity, and committed to ensuring that environmental justice is happening for all communities. As Dan Utek, who you heard from earlier, stated, the EPA and the administrator and the staff all are probably really excited about the final recommendations that you all are putting forth, and really looking forward to digging in on how we integrate those recommendations into the agency's policies and programs. So I want to close by reinforcing that EPA cannot tackle the environmental challenges of our time without input from you in younger communities, because your perspectives are lived experiences and they have a unique response to how we fight climate change. And so as you, again, prepare your final recommendations, EPA staff is really off and ready to start to present you all with the next sets of charge questions. Because again, your advice is really invaluable to the agency and making sure that we are really armed with all the tools and resources we need in order to be able to tackle some of the pressing issues of our time, especially those affecting young people. So thank you again for your deep commitment to EPA's mission to protect human health and the environment through your hard work on this council, but also through the work that you all are doing every day in the work that you're doing in your community on a day-to-day basis. So thank you all so much. Appreciate you. Looking forward to engaging with you all. I've engaged with quite a few of you over the last year, and so looking forward to continuing to engage with you all. So with that, I will stop there and I'll turn it over to Carissa.
Thank you, Rosemary. We really appreciate you joining us and closing out the second NEYAC meeting And a milestone here, again, voting and putting forward these recommendations that the EPA administrator, staff are ready to begin reviewing and implementing where we can in our policies and programs. So with that, before we begin to adjourn, I just want to send out or mention a few reminders that the public comment period will remain open in the docket until 11:59 Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, July 31st. So that's 2 weeks from today. The agenda and meeting material will be made available on the NEYAC website, as well as the docket at regulations.gov. Additionally, minutes of this meeting will be prepared. The minutes will include a description of the matters discussed and the conclusions reached by you all, the NEYAC members. The minutes and recording of this meeting will be available through the NEYAC website in the coming weeks. We look forward to scheduling the next meeting later this fall, when you all will present the final set of recommendations to EPA. It is also during this meeting where you will be presented with the next round of charge questions and topics. This meeting, of course, will be published in the Federal Register 15 days prior to that meeting with the dates and times. Again, thank you all for joining today. We truly appreciate your commitment, your active voices today. It was a great, productive meeting. And so with that, I am adjourning this National Environmental Youth Advisory Council meeting for today. Thank you all for joining.